Hello friends, a very warm welcome. As we have already been discussing about Weber, we have done a short note and understanding about his biography, and also we went on to understand why he is an historical sociologist. Now we are going to talk about what are his views on historical sociology, and we are going to introduce further such concepts and terms also which are very important from the examination perspective. So what should be the goal? The goal should be that you should be understanding very clearly and also side by side making notes by writing down the quotes, keywords, and also making sure that you are revising it many times so that it get embedded in your mind. So let's start. Weber's views on historical sociology, when we say, then they were shaped in part, not completely, in part by the availability and his commitment to the study of empirical historical data. The keyword over here is empirical historical data, because he was the first generation of scholars who was actually having an access or availability of reliable data on historical phenomena from many parts of the world. This is being said by MacRae. You can even quote when you're getting a question comment, that definitely you must always quote who said about Weber, not just Weber. So he was more inclined to immerse himself in these historical data than to dream up about abstract generalizations about the basic thrust of history. So he was not interested in theoretical ideas. He was interested in giving them a scientific backing. So this led him to have some important insights. It also created serious problems side by side, because he often got so involved in the historical detail that he actually lost sight of the basic reasons for the historical study, why he started such a project, why he started actually in the beginning. He will be forgetting because he will be so much greatly involved in detailed analysis on the scientific lines. So we say the sweep of his historical studies, it will be having so many epochs and so many societies, such a big chunk he is taking up, that if you see those big events and big concepts and subjects, then if you want to make an interpretation, you would say that he is only making rough generalizations. That is what said by Roth. But in spite of his limitation as a human being, but as a genius, Weber's commitment to the scientific study of empirical phenomena, that is the keyword over here, third keyword, scientific study of empirical phenomena, made him attractive in developing discipline of sociology in the US. One of the greatest contributor to the development of sociology in the US. So what we can conclude, Weber believed history is composed of an inexhaustible array of specific phenomena. Why inexhaustible? He is saying inexhaustible because he is believing that more and more scientifically and more analytically you are going to find something, more and more ways you can understand it. To study these phenomena, he went on to develop some concepts, because these concepts are the tools which are useful for research in real world. So as a general rule, Weber, although did not adhere to it strictly, and even you speak about other sociologists, they are also not doing so. The task of sociology was to develop these concepts. Because of sociology, you can say these concepts, these tools were developed, which history was to use, that you're going to use them in history in a causal analysis of a specific historical phenomena, taking up an event, identifying their causal analysis through these new tools. So Weber is combining specific and general, both kind of, things, to develop a science that did justice to the complex nature of social lives, because you cannot even define social life completely. It is so complex. Human life is so complex. Societies are so complex. So one concept what we are going to discuss is Verstand. So Weber felt that sociology had an advantage over natural scientists, because sociologists will be able to understand social phenomena, whereas natural scientists could not gain similar understanding, because they are going to think only about behavior of an atom or chemical compound. They cannot understand other intricacies and other external factors. So the German word for understanding is called Verstand. So Weber used this special term in his historical research, and it is obviously most controversial contribution, or the most controversial contribution also, methodology of contemporary sociology when one speaks about. So verse 10, that means understanding, and it is a kind of a tool, it is a kind of a methodology of understanding for understanding contemporary sociology. So when we say that what Weber meant by verse 10, we will also underscore some of the problems involved in its conceptualization, because unlike natural sciences, it is not complete. So the controversy surrounding this concept, as well as some of the problems in interpreting it, what Weber meant, grows out of a general problem with Weber's methodological thoughts. So when you see and try to give it a shape and idea, then we are actually leaving a certain kind of gap or space, because after all, it is a social concept. As Thomas Berger argued, Weber was neither very sophisticated nor very consistent in his methodological pronouncements. It was said by Hackman also. He tended to be careless and imprecise because he felt he was simply repeating ideas that were well known in those times of German historians. He, as pointed out earlier, Weber did not think too highly of methodological reflections. He was not believing that, whatever was already there, it is going to help in understanding of sociology. So Weber's thoughts on Western were relatively common among German historians of his day and were derived from a field known as hermeneutics. That is what later on, analyzed by Brown and Martin and Pressler and Da Silva. You can always quote it. So, what is hermeneutics? So, hermeneutics is a special approach to the understanding and interpretation of published writings. That is what is called hermeneutics. And the goal was to understand the thinking of the author and also the basic structure of the text. Author, text, text, and author. So, Weber, among others, they sought to extend this idea of understanding of text. They were going to apply this on understanding of social life. So, once we have realized that historical method is nothing more or less than the classical method of interpretation applied to overt action instead of text, that means you are applying not to the text but to the life, a method aimed at identifying human design, meaning thereby certain thing is happening, that means what is there behind a certain observable event. Certain thing is being happening. For example, if there is Dasera celebration going on, so what is the human pattern behind it? Or for that matter, Dasera festival across Kullu in last one decade. So what is basic human design? What are the empirical ideas behind it? So we shall have no difficulty in accepting that it can just be as well as applied to human interactions and then finally to individual actors also. So he is creating a kind of a process. He is creating a kind of a setup. From this point of view, all history is interaction, which has to be interpreted in terms of rival plans of various actors. Someone is doing something, some character is actually behaving in a certain way, why it is happening in a certain way, and another person is also behaving in a certain way, certain thing is taking place, there must be something behind it. So Weber sought to use the tools of hermeneutics to understand actors, interactions, and when we say actors, when we say interaction, then we say all human history. Say for example Hinduism in Gupta period. So Hinduism in Gupta period, it is driven by certain processes, certain events, and certain kind of developments. If you see from Weber's perspective, if Weber is going to think about it, he is going to identify a process and tool behind it, and then he's going to do it. So one common misconception about verse 10 is that it is simply the use of intuition. No, it is not that. So many critics see as a soft, irrational, and subjective research methodology, which is not. But Weber rejected this idea and he said that it is not intuition, it is not sympathetic participation, or it is not just empathy. To him, Worston involved systematic and rigorous research. So it is not feeling for a text or a social phenomena. It is a systematic and rigorous research. If you are going to write mains answer also, for example, you are reading a lot and then you are writing, it is possible that you are having such a talent and brains that you can create a pattern behind it. Otherwise you will have to make notes, you will have to make sure that the demanding ideas are there in the question. Same thing is here. Or other words, for Weber, Worston was a rational procedure of study. Please note down this bold and keyword because this is what you're going to write in your answers. and it is a rigorous practice which will help you. So the key question in interpreting Weber's concept of Western is whether he thought it was a most appropriately applied to the subjective states of individual actors, or subjective states of individual actor means a person or a character or an or you can say event, it is having different dimensions behind it, or subjective aspects of large scale units of analysis, for example culture. Because a culture which is a large scale unit, and if I'm going to analyze certain cultures, say for example food culture of North India, or say for example Buddhist culture in Northeast. So Weber's focus on cultural and socio-cultural context of action leads us to the view that Webster was a tool for macro level analysis. Let's see what is causality, cause. Another, it is another aspect of Weber's methodology, and it is commitment to the study of causality, as said by Ringer. Because Weber was inclined to see the study of causes of social phenomena as being within the domain of history. Because he is not saying that these causes, any event is there and what is the cause for such a phenomena, it is within the domain of history and not sociology. Yet, to the degree that history and sociology cannot be clearly separated, and they certainly are not clearly separated by Weber's work also, the issue of causality is also relevant to sociology, though it is not part of it. Causality is also important because it is another place in which Weber sought to combine, we have already discussed, nomothetic and idiographic approaches. I hope you can recall and connect. By causality, Weber meant probability that an event will be followed or it will be accompanied by another event. And in his view, it was not just sufficient or not enough to look for historical constants, repetitions, analogies, and parallels. It is not supposed to be something same or similar, something happening. But researcher, or what Weber was looking, was at the reasons and the meanings of historical changes. What are the reasons? What are the meanings? These ideas again of Weber are, you can say, here said by Roth. So although Weber can be seen as having one-way causal model, because Karl Marx, when we say he is having a dialectical mode of reasoning, but in spite of one-way causal model, Weber is attuned to interrelationships between economy, society, polity, organization, social stratification, religion, and so forth. That means the model is one, or you can say it will seem like he is not going for a kind of a dialectical reasoning that something is happening and then it is happening because of certain reason. In Hindi what we call satat sangharsh, but still it is going to be different over here. Thus, Weber operates with multi-causal approach, in which hosts of interactive influences are very often effective causal factors. So though he is not making things complex, but then if you see from a certain perspective, then on surface they seem to be complex. He is looking for reasons behind repetitions and meanings behind repetitions, and those meanings and reasons may be repeating themselves or maybe also changing. It all depends, and it is linked with history, economy, polity, organization, social stratification, religion, and so forth. So the approach is multi-causal. So Weber was quite clear on the issue of multiple causality in his study. He was knowing that only one cause is not there. There may be many causes behind a certain phenomena. For example, his study of relationship between Protestantism and spirit of capitalism. Although his work is sometimes repeated differently, Weber simply argued, if we say in his words, that Protestant ethic was one of the causal factors in the rise of modern spirit of capitalism. Okay, Protestant ethic is just one of the factors. Protestantism was not the complete cause, that it is only because of the Protestant values, those values of simplicity, Christianity, work ethics, it is only because of that modern capitalism took its shape. Similarly, he found it foolish that capitalism could have risen only as a result of Protestant Reformation. He is not believing in it. He is saying there are other factors also which could have led to the same result. So that is why when we see in Weber's words, we say we shall as far as possible, clarify the manner and the general direction in which religious movements have influenced the development of material culture. Manner, general direction in which religious movements they have influenced the development of material culture. That means here religious movements, you can say example of again Protestantism, and then material culture means spirit of capitalism. Only when this has been determined with reasonable accuracy, that scientific analysis, reasonable accuracy, can the attempt be made to estimate to what extent the historical development of modern culture can be attributed to those religious forces and to what extent to others. UPSC is also asking the same thing in similar ways. Examination is also saying up to what extent are you on track for studies, up to what extent, up to what extent. It is not just you are having books and that's why you are a brilliant studying, you have failed in class 12th, and then you claim that I have failed in class 12th, and then suddenly I study these books, I study this coaching, I study these things, and then I have cracked the exam. So the critical thing to remember here is Weber was thinking on causality in his belief that because we can have a special understanding of social life that is called Western, that's what we discussed. The causal knowledge of social sciences is different from the causal knowledge of natural sciences. We have already discussed this in the beginning, and Weber is saying meaningfully interpretable human conduct is identifiable by reference to valuations and meanings. There is a reference, there is a boundary to something, there is a certain reference points, and there is a certain meaning to something. For this reason, our criteria for causal explanation have a unique kind of satisfaction in the historical explanation of such an entity. When you are going to follow this process, that's what Weber is saying, because special understanding is built upon interpretable human conduct which you can interpret, and that interpretation is identifiable because you are putting certain tools, certain values to it, which is having certain meanings. This kind of causal explanation is going to give a unique kind of satisfaction in the historical explanation of such an entity rather than a generic and a general explanation. Thus, the causal knowledge of the social scientists is different from the causal knowledge of natural scientists. This is what examination is also going to ask you very clearly. So Weber's thoughts on causality were intimately related to his efforts to come to the grip with the conflict between nomothetic and ideographic knowledge. So those who subscribe to nomothetic point of view, they would argue that there is a necessary relationship between a social phenomena among social phenomena, whereas the supporters of an ideographic perspective would be inclined to see only random relationships among these entities. So both are having their own viewpoints, ideographic and nomothetic. Both are having their own viewpoints, as I just said. So as usual, he is not taking any of the positions we have discussed in the previous interaction also. He is going to take a middle position through the concept of adequate causality. So the notion of adequate causality adopt the view that the best we can do in sociology is to make probabilistic statements about the relationship between social phenomena. That is, if X occurs, then it is probable that Y will also occur. It is not a science, it is not a forensic science. So the goal is to estimate the degree to which a certain effect is favored by certain conditions. ऐसा होने में किन factors का हाथ है. So I have discussed with you again 2 or 3 very important concepts based on which we can understand Weber further in our future interactions. And once you make note of them and you understand these concepts, including hermeneutics and also why and how Weber is understanding things of historical sociology in a certain way, this is going to help you to create more concrete understanding, and you can, I'm sure, will be able to attempt comment type questions and also short notes very effectively within 150 words at max. Thank you very much. See you in the next session with more keenness, focus, and also revision so that you can get maximum out of minimum time.